Yeah, I do feel, we've been obviously covering very closely the Biden administration's take on China, and it's been very weird to get a feel for it because, on the one hand, Biden will, to put in place some good sanctions on chip technology or the support for Taiwan. At the same time, back in, I think it was October, they shut down the China Initiative, which was the special program of the DOJ investigating Chinese espionage. And they shut that down because it was racist, which is, a propaganda tool the Chinese Communist Party uses all the time. So, yeah, it really seems like the China policy in the Biden administration is really at war with itself, which isn't entirely unique to the Biden administration.
I think you saw some tensions even in the Trump administration between
Mnuchin.
People who are more focused on the economic stuff and then people who are more focused on the threat from the CCP from defense and, diplomatically. So,
well, I would point out, I think still the largest flashpoint is Taiwan. We've had two Indo-PACOM military commanders say that the Chinese are going to move against Taiwan before the end of the decade or as soon as 2027. And this, to me, is very dangerous. There's some recent intelligence, I don't know what it is, but I think Secretary of State Blinken kind of tipped his hand several months ago when he said, yes, the Chinese appear to have speeded up or accelerated their timetable for retaking Taiwan. Now, if you look at the Biden administration, again, they don't understand foreign threats, in my view, from a policy standpoint. They're totally reliant on diplomacy, which is usually, and then they have this mantra that we have to defer to our allies and friends rather than lead. I think it's a rehash of the Obama policy of leading from behind. But if you recall, they had very, very solid intelligence that Russia was going to invade Ukraine, and they were unable to deter the Russians. So here we have intelligence that the Chinese are going to move against Taiwan, and I don't think they're doing enough to deter that. Instead of talking about the threat from Russia and sending billions and billions in aid to Ukraine, I think we should be sending much more military support and aid to the Asia-Pacific region. For example, why haven't we dispatched a second aircraft carrier strike group? We have one now based in Tokyo. We should have another one either in Guam or in the Philippines or somewhere in the area. Those are the kind of messages that would signal to the Chinese Communist Party that the U.S. is absolutely serious about defending Taiwan. But instead, we hear this effort, we need to talk with the Chinese and have diplomatic exchanges. And like I said, Blinken hasn't really canceled his trip to Beijing. He just said it's been postponed.
So where is this neo-appeasement? Where is it coming from, in your opinion? Why do they view things this way? Especially when, by the CCP's own use of language, they consider themselves at war with the United States.
Yeah, I think it's a reflection of what I've really focused on over the years is the infiltration of Marxist and leftist radicals within the Democratic Party. I couldn't identify people by name with this, but I remember back in 1968, the New Left radicals were very influenced by Mao Zedong. And Maoism during the Cultural Revolution. It was called the strategy of rage, where rage was used as a tool to cleanse or purify the Chinese Communist Party, and it was an utter disaster. The death toll was in the hundreds of thousands, if not a million or so. And these radicals in 1968 ended up getting their heads cracked by police in Chicago. And they said, well, we're not doing this anymore. We're making the long march through the institutions of America. And I think these radicals, again, unidentified, unspecific, but with those sentiments, kind of really emerged during the Obama administration and now are back in positions of power in the Biden administration. So that's just my theory. I don't have proof for that, but that's what I think.
How does that American Marxist ideology linked to the Chinese Communist Party, in your opinion?
Well, China is now the leading for leftists and Marxists. China is the shining light on the hill for radicals and Marxists, because the Soviet Union obviously crashed and burned thanks to the Reagan administration and the Pope John Paul. But China has, by adopting quasi-capitalist economics, has tried to show some form of prosperity. And now, under Xi Jinping, they are aggressively promoting the Chinese communist model as an alternative to democracy. And I think there's clearly an affinity for American Marxists and radicals in looking at China as the future. They would like to see a Chinese communist system here in the United States. There's no question about that.
Well, I think
what's strange about that is, I think should be pretty clear to Americans that China has, let's call them issues, such as the genocide or at least persecution of ethnic minorities, as well as a massive wealth gap between the poor and the very, very rich, which are both very much against what Marxists believe in, as far as I understand.
Yeah, I remember, and this goes back to one of the key Trump administration policies towards China, which has not been fully backed by the Biden administration. And that was this idea that the Chinese Communist Party, with 95 million members, is all of China. The Chinese Communist Party promotes that narrative. I remember many years ago, a PLA colonel who was visiting some think tank in Philadelphia came to my office at the Washington Times, and I told him, I said, listen, and he said, you're anti-China, and I said, no, I'm very much pro-China, pro-Chinese people. I'm very much against the Chinese Communist Party, and he went into almost a hysteria over saying that no, there's no difference between the party and the people. This is kind of what I call the false religion of Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics, that the party represents the Chinese people. That's totally false. The Chinese people hate and despise the Communist Party. They recognize that it's totally corrupt, and they don't want to live under it, but yet they're stuck with this mass totalitarian surveillance state that denies them freedom and real opportunity.
Right. So, I mean, how can an American Marxist square the ethnic cleansing and the massive wealth gap that's happening in China with also saying that China is the model we want to look towards?
Well, they're believers in Marxism-Leninism. Every leader since Mao in communist China has had one typical narrative, and that is that China must lead the world against global capitalism led by the United States. So Marxist-Lenin, this is their religion. They believe it's not based on facts. It's based on things like historical materialism, which says that all progress is through struggle. The opposite is true. All progress is through cooperation. But there are these false precepts, and they're not based on facts. They're based on belief in Marxist principles and Leninist practice. And so it doesn't matter for them. And again, I'm not saying that all radicals have this view, or even all Marxists, but I know that there are a number of people who advocate this and who believe that China is the model of the future. I mean, you get a sense of it with Tom Friedman, the New York Times columnist, who once praised China's system. What a great system. He said, they have all this, they're making all this progress, and they don't have to deal with the nasty business of democracy and competing political parties.
One thing I find interesting about people like Tom Friedman or some of these people who are maybe more economic apologists, like Wall Street apologists for China, is that there doesn't seem to be actually a recognition of the Chinese Communist Party, or that China is a Marxist-Leninist system, that there is an attempt to kind of almost let's just paper over that part. Like, let's not talk about like everything that they talk about in their speeches about
Compartmentalize the like
Leninism.
human rights stuff, and like, you know, we can do business, make money.
We can make money in China. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember doing a debate in New York City about the threat from China. It was a group called Intelligence Squared. This was many years ago. And I was on the side that said China was a threat, and Mike Pillsbury was another one, and Mearsheimer. And on the pro-China side was a businessman whose name I can't remember, but Stapleton Roy, who was a big protege of Henry Kissinger in the diplomacy sphere. And after the debate, the businessman said to me, he said, I've been doing business in China for 20 years, and I've never met a communist. And my response to him was, well, you should go visit the People's Liberation Army Museum in Beijing. And I was allowed to do that during a travel with the Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, back in the late 90s. And we went to the museum, which had all kinds of destroy the Americans and America's the enemy. But they also had statues of all the communist founders, from Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin in the museum. And so it kind of shows you that there's really, the head of the Office of Naval Intelligence, Admiral Mike Studeman, said in a recent speech that Americans have been totally naive about the threat from China. I totally agree. I've spent the last 20 or 30 years trying to educate people through my reporting and through my books on this threat. I think once people understand that threat, and as I mentioned earlier, the balloon incident, I think, was really a wake-up call, kind of a Sputnik moment for a lot of Americans. And again, the administration is trying to tamp that down because they want to go into this new détente policy with China over war fears. And that is, they've even announced that, we want to compete, but most important, I think John Kirby, the White House strategic communications person, after Qin Gang came out and made this threatening comment about the path to war unless the U.S. changes course, he said, we want to compete, and most importantly, we want to avoid a conflict.